Thanks to Slightly Mad Studios, we've been playing a preview version of Project Cars 3. And to continue our coverage of the game on this channel, I decided to do something a bit different here. Plug in an Xbox One controller, use the chase cam, and play the game from a more arcade perspective to see what we thought of it.
Now you listen here, he's not a simulator, he's been a very naughty arcade game.
If you enjoy Monty Python references, click that like button and maybe subscribe. Ah yes, the great sim mass debate. It keeps going and it never stops. Fantastic for YouTubers because there's infinite amount of clickbait content to be made about everything to do with racing cars. Now, before I get going into this video, I do want to be really clear. The wheel support, the camera view options, and the actual input when driving with the wheel and pedal in Project Cars 3 are actually really nice. Way better than many other games out there that class themselves or market themselves as simulators. So let me get that clear. I'm not in this video in any way saying the wheel support, wheel input, and the driving in this is total arcade. I'm not saying that. You know, people always take whatever you say on YouTube totally out of context to make their own arguments with it. Don't do that, it's annoying. But what I will say is when you play Project Cars 3 in a more game-like way, i.e. you approach it in a total aggression, complete disregard to damage, really just hammer the car through the corners, sometimes using the handbrake where you wouldn't use a handbrake if you were genuinely trying to drive a real car quickly. If you approach it like a lunatic, it's way more enjoyable than if you approach it as you would a hardcore simulator. And I think that is probably why, in part, this game actually plays really nicely with a gamepad. As I say, for this footage, I'm using an Xbox One controller, and I have to give it to Slightly Mad Studios. This has some of the nicest controller input that I've played in a racing game, in the sense that you can feel that there's a lot of depth to the physics. There's a lot going on under the hood, despite the fact that you are playing with a game controller without force feedback or anything. Rather ironically, it feels more like a sim with the game controller than it does with a wheel. Explain a muscle inbound. So normally when you play simcades or your sort of more realistic arcade games with a game controller, what they tend to do is utterly gimp the mechanics of the vehicle such that you're effectively driving a rubber brick that's like immediately responsive to the controls and super glued to the track, or totally unresponsive to the controls and kind of just train lines around, and you just have to slow down, otherwise you'll understeer. With Project Cars 3, you really get an impression that the vehicles are really nimble, and with the game controller you can really manipulate those vehicles and choose the lines and choose how you control them, be aggressive, not be aggressive, oversteer, understeer, and you can do that in a way that's really quite analogous to how you would actually approach a realistic game with a steering wheel, but with a game controller. Now, the way it seems to me that SMS have achieved this is that even when you turn off all the assists and everything with the car, there's still some kind of input assist going on to smooth out the actual input of the gamepad and to make it more drivable. But you'll only really notice that if you play from the onboard view here. You can see that the driver's doing stuff that you're not necessarily putting in to the gamepad. But when you're playing from the chase view and the external views, you actually just feel really connected to it. Particularly surprising is when you're going into braking zones in this, the way that you get on the brakes, and if you overbrake, the way you can counter steer and hold your actual slide on the brakes with the gamepad in a way that's very intuitive and feels really dynamic and natural, which again is ironic because when I play this with a steering wheel, the braking feels a bit baked and just lacking in depth to what I'm doing. It's like you can there's no, you can just drive very badly and it will mush over that and it won't matter, which makes it work a lot nicer on a gamepad and just makes it feel like there's something missing if you're used to those super duper highly granular hardcore simulators. Again, to be clear, it's not bad on a wheel, it just doesn't have the depth that you expect from what a simulator with wheels and pedals. But that perceivable lack of depth when played with a wheel is mitigated when played with a gamepad, a device that's pretty horrendous for actually driving somewhat realistic cars with. So yeah, the end result is, I would like to see more arcade games, though finger quotations, that use this type of method of gamepad input. The only real thing lacking from the gamepad input with this, I would say, is the haptics and stuff, which you get with some Xbox One games. You do get rumble and everything at the moment. Again, early access build, those kind of trigger haptics and stuff can be something that's done very late in development. But, you know, if you had the trigger haptics, especially on the new PlayStation and the new Xbox One controllers, to help you threshold brake and trail brake and things more precisely and accelerate more precisely without spinning up the wheels, then yeah, I mean, I would just like to see this type of gamepad input to be more the norm. Off to China we go, and the Toyota Supra road car that's in this game. And I know you guys are going to be like, oh, but how does it compare to these two other direct games? Name some games so we can contextualise it. Okay, I will do. Bloody hell. Bloody hell, I'm preemptively reading demanding comments in my head. Don't be a YouTuber, guys, it makes you go mental. So what I would describe this as is if you take something like Forza 7 Motorsport, the controls on that are actually pretty good, especially the haptics, but the cars are a little bit plank-like and then suddenly overly twitchy, and you can rotate and lose control, especially when you get to the much faster cars in the Forza games. You quite often get into very annoying spins that are unrecoverable, and the amount of controllable slip isn't so great. It can actually, when you're actually trying to drive it really fast and precisely, can be quite frustrating and require an absolute ton of practice to get good at it. Whereas GT Sport, personally, I find the controls on that with a gamepad super muted. In many ways, I think GT Sport, you get a good sense of a car's weight, and the cars feel very solid and very massy in that, but you lose that twitchy response in GT Sport, if that makes sense. You lose that sense of nimbleness that real-world cars often can actually be really, really quite nimble. I think Project Cars 3 is a really good in-between of that GT Sport and Forza. So in Project Cars 3, you can lose control of the cars. If you lock up the brake, I've turned all the assists off. If you turn all the assists off and you overbrake and you get massive slip, as you see there, we overdid it on the rear end, car spins around. It was totally my fault, totally overdrove it, you'll lose control. But there's quite a margin before that happens, and quite a good amount of controllable slip, so you can play with that a bit without it being too frustrating. Also, you notice we went over a bump there on the road, that unsettled the car. I then had to correct it with the gamepad and had to correct it in a semi-natural way. It was a little bit of a moment, but it wasn't like, you've gone over a bump, suspension's compressed, that's it, there's no catching it with the gamepad, which I find does happen in Forza a fair amount. I don't find it happens in GT Sport, but I find GT Sport muted. So really, this is a good, I would place this in the middle of Forza 7 and GT Sport in terms of sort of car controllability, which is spot on and quite enjoyable. Now, enough of talking about the bloody handling with a gamepad. I would like to draw attention to this floor cam. And, when I'm playing driving simulators, I'm in the cockpit. That's how those games are supposed to be played. That's what they're designed for. That's where the immersion is. I'm approaching them like a sim. Play sims like sims. Play this from the chase cams and these floor cams and what have you. And right, this playing on this China stage, track, road, city, from this view, really reminded me of that Getaway Stockholm video, and it really allows you to appreciate the different floor textures and everything whizzing past you, especially with the light line up. But also you can really see the suspension compression and the little subtle car movements and how the car's laterally scrubbing across the road. And one thing it really made stand out, which I didn't notice when I was playing in the cockpit view whilst I was driving the wheel, is the external car sounds are actually pretty nice in this as well. So, again, the suspension compression sounds are quite nicely done. The engine note and the sort of popping from the exhaust is quite nicely done. The echo and the environmental, the spatial sounds from your car and the other cars, again, quite nicely done. So, you know, this game just makes so much more sense when you play it like you would play a traditional arcade game. Just jumping from camera to camera, messing around, and also trying to win a race against the AI whilst ploughing through a city, chilled out with your gamepad. It just makes sense that way. Now, given that SMS haven't paid me or sponsored me to make this, I've been far too positive, so I need to be more negative so that companies are encouraged to bribe me. I'm really not very good at this YouTube business, Lark. Negativity, here we go. Negative, here we come. So, I have put more time into the press build, and the one biggest negative at the moment I find with this is the AI seem to think that they're working for a 1970s police force where they just want to keep pit manoeuvring and rotating you. And as you get further up the grid, because the grid is so compacted in this, which actually makes for really nice intense racing, as you get further up the grid, the likelihood that you get rotated increases because the car, you know, they're harder cars at the front and they seem to be a little bit more aggressive at the front. But then you increase the chance that you do get rotated. You get rotated, and then because the grid is compacted, oh, they all pass you and you go right to the back again. I really hope that this is just an issue with the preview build. I would assume it probably is that the AI aggression just hasn't been tweaked fully. So it's a very common thing that gets sorted out very later on in a game's development, like literally very later on. So don't judge the game based on this now, but I just wanted to be negative. And that just makes racing the AI frustrating at this point in time. There is no rewind in this game, so when you do get rotated, it really does feel like a big punishment. Now, I actually think no rewind is fantastic. I bloody hate rewind mechanic in arcade races because it removes the pressure and the tension from race driving. So please don't put that in the game. It shouldn't be. I get rewind is good to make racing games less frustrating in a sense and more accessible, but to me it just kills the game. And if you can turn it off, it's like, well, yeah, you can turn it off, but then it's the game's designed around having the rewind, so you always leave it on. So yeah, that would be a negative. Obviously, multiplayer would change that, and it's going to be really interesting to see how it works with the netcode in terms of car contacts and how aggressive the driving is in multiplayer. I imagine it's going to be like thermonuclear warfare, but it might be fun, it might not be. I've not tried it, so I don't know, but it's certainly going to be interesting to find out. So let me try and round things up here with my gamepad chase cam, hello viewers, approach to this game. And what I'll say is when I play this with the gamepad and approach it like that, I actually do get quite nostalgia vibes from this. I get a kind of PGR, Need for Speed, the sort of early 2000s kind of racing game vibe from it, which I quite like, and that is sort of compounded again by the way you get the XP in this for completing the events and the way you progress through the single player, which hopefully I'll be able to show off in a future video closer to the release of the actual game. So who's Project Cars 3-4? 3-4? Who's it for? Wow. Basically, if you can forget Project Cars 1 and 2, they didn't happen, deleted, Men in Black, flashlight in the face, and you forget all the sort of sim promotion behind this, just ignore that, especially if you're a sim racer, ignore that, and you just treat it like you just were to jump in and you didn't know anything about it and you were to play it. I think most people, even sim racers, would probably actually quite enjoy it. And whilst playing it, most people will probably go, This is quite a solid game with some really quite deep handling mechanics, which are arguably as good, if not better, than something like GT Sport and Forza. So there you go. That hopefully describes who this game is for, who will likely enjoy it the most. I think people that are completely new to things, haven't played Project Cars, maybe they like Forza, maybe they like GT Sport, and they just want to do some close, tight-knit racing. In terms of absolute details, well, this is just a preview video. You'll have to subscribe and click the like button and also bang your forehead on the bell so that you can actually get our final feedback and final review of this game when it does indeed come out, because things may or may not change. So, until then, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy tea drinking, and goodbye.